I'm Alex Mozed, and welcome to Winner Take All. I'm really excited to have special guests with us today. Marc Polymeropoulos, a recently retired, I think 26 plus year CIA veteran. He was former senior intelligence officer in the CIA, has recently published a book, a great book here called Clarity in Crisis, Leadership Lessons from the CIA. Marc, so great to have you with us. Thank you so much for joining.
It's great to be here. You did a great job pronouncing my last name. I always got to start with a funny story on that. I was in the Middle East, many years ago, and the president's briefers were going down to see George W. Bush, and they wanted my view on a situation. And I was pretty excited. I was a young officer. I was a manager at a CIA station. So I waited a couple hours, and they came back, and I said, "How'd it go?" And they said, "Hey, we're in the Oval. We spent the whole time trying to pronounce your last name." So you nailed it. You did better than President Bush.
Yeah, well, thank you, Marc. It might be a little bit of a low bar, but much appreciated. I think you mentioned, you're a very humble guy, but you were saying that, you don't have the same kind of tiers in the CIA, but I guess, before your retirement, you were kind of the equivalent of like a 4-star general in the CIA. Did I catch that right?
So I retired in the Senior Intelligence Service, and the military loves to have kind of equivalent ranks. So I say this a lot, but I managed several thousand people before I retired, and I spent a long time there, 26 years. So I really grew up in the place. It's frankly the only job I ever had, which makes me uniquely unqualified to go into the private sector. So I wrote a book, but ultimately it was a wonderful career, and I did a lot of great things along the way.
Awesome. And, we've got a big techie audience, lots of entrepreneurs watching the show. And the subheader on the book here is leadership lessons, right? And, I felt like there was some mappings, right? There was definitely some mappings between what you were talking about, about like, hitting rock bottom, or, kind of what you have to do to really kind of like become a leader or grow people, that I saw parallels with kind of the trials and tribulations of tech entrepreneurs. Is that how you were envisioning it when you were writing the book and kind of thinking about these leadership lessons, and what are some of those key criteria on that journey?
I think, you always wonder when you write a book on leadership, who is it going to appeal to? And someone gave me some good advice one time. They said, look, it's got to be to the entrepreneur, to the librarian. And so you try to make it appeal to everybody. But I'm really excited to be talking to you today, because I think really the entrepreneur class is something that this book will appeal to, because so much of what we do in the CIA is deal with ambiguity and deal with times of uncertainty. And it's about risk taking and manage risk and how you build teams to get there. And so I think there are enormous parallels on this. And then we can talk maybe a little bit later also about technology too, because that's the one thing that the CIA has to remain relevant in the years to come. And that's how we not only embrace but also defeat technical means that other services, other counterintelligence services are using to track our officers. So I think it's the entrepreneur audience that you have is spot on to really enjoy this book.
So yeah, let's drill into that. Clarity in crisis. How do you achieve such a thing? I know you got to read the book, but what does that mean to have clarity in crisis, and what do you think some of the key building blocks to be able to have that characteristic?
Sure. So I wrote the book at the end of my career when I actually found that clarity. I became a great leader, unfortunately, before retirement. I think that happens so often. And I look back in earlier times of my career, and you kind of grimace. Maybe you read something that you wrote, or you think about a situation, but I became a really good leader at the end. And I sat back and I thought, why did this happen? Particularly when, I live in a world of gray. And so what I did is I came up with some principles that kind of I started to understand, because at the end of my career, there would be times of crisis, times of ambiguity. And I found that was my happy place. I was comfortable there. It's kind of an odd thing to say. So, when people want to flee, I'm actually in a position where, hey, we're okay. And then I started thinking about, how I got to that position. So I came up with these 9 principles, and it's all about sitting, in positions when there's adversity, there's a lack of situational awareness. I call it living in the gray. And you're just okay with it. You're like, I'm good right here. And boy, nothing can define an entrepreneur more than the ability, or a successful one, the ability to manage that. So, maybe now we can talk about, a couple of the principles.
Yeah, and maybe an example story here. Like for me, for example, when I didn't know how we were going to make payroll, not just 2 weeks, not just a week, literally maybe 4 hours out, and and my hands started to shake, and you have heart palpitations, and then kind of like everything that happens after that, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, not fazed by it, right? Were there what was maybe one of those like real harrowing moments for you that then everything that came after was like, yeah, you guys don't even know?
So one of the principles I talk about, and it's, and in each one of the principles, it's a catchy phrase because that's just what you do. But I called it winning an Oscar, and let me tell you why. Because I always say there's no day off as a leader because all eyes are on you. And I joke that if you need a friend, get a dog. And so let me give you some examples of this because it's really important. Because when times are tough, when you have to meet that payroll, like maybe you have 3 or 4 employees and they're looking at you like, all right, boss, what are we going to do? You don't want to be shaken right there. So I'll give you a perfect example, and it's actually there's some funny ones. So there's one funny one serious one. The funny one was, I was a leader of one of our paramilitary bases along the Pakistan-Afghanistan border about a decade ago, and I had the baddest crew around. These are folks, veterans of the Special Operations Command. They've been in Tora Bora and they've been in Black Hawk Down in Somalia. And we go out on a patrol one time and we come back. And I've been out I hadn't slept for 36 hours. I was hungry. And for the first time in several months, I sat by myself, literally in the mess hall. It's a lot of camaraderie. I was tired. I sat by myself and just wanted to eat by myself. And these toughest dudes in the planet, it was like, like I stole their toys. Like Christmas was, or a holiday was canceled. And they were like, why is Mark mad at us? I was like, I couldn't believe it. I was like, are you guys kidding me? I'm just tired. But I sat back and I reflected on it. And the bottom line is I failed in that. What I didn't do was tell them, hey, I'm tired right now. Like I got to take a knee. I'm fine. But I'm going to go be by myself right now. And so I love that story because it just shows how you kind of, as a leader, how you need to be kind of your forward-facing persona as a leader. And the other one was, I was in an embassy in the Middle East several years ago and was attacked by Al-Qaeda. There was a terrifying moment. There's grenades and there's small arms fire hitting the front of the embassy. And we have these drills, how to react to this. Everybody gets under the desk. They don some body armor. I'm trying to open the weapons safe to hand out weapons. My heart rate went from 0 to 100. I was flat out terrified. Like so much of this book I talk about, it's not, I'm not, thumping my chest on anything. I was scared to death. But afterwards, when we did the after action report, and unfortunately everyone lived, but when we did the after action report, everybody said to me, Mark, you looked so calm there. And I was like, I didn't say it, but I was like, I wasn't calm. I was scared. I thought we were dead. But you kind of look back and reflect, and just that persona you have in times of crisis, is really important. And you can also be honest. You can actually say, hey, everyone, we're going to be fine. Like, hey, I'm scared too, but yeah, just get on the desk, put your body armor on, or you could say, just the example you gave before, hey, this is a little kind of crunch time. We're cutting a little close on payroll, aren't we? And smile. But it's just the way your persona, how you're seen is really important. So I love that principle in terms of winning an Oscar because I think it's really important when you deal with times of ambiguity and crisis.
Yeah, I love that. You're a leader. People watch you. They look up to you. You got to always be thinking about that and setting the right example. Even when you think that, maybe you don't have to, right? And people notice. Also, as a leader, you got to be able to embrace change, right? And you got to you have to know when to pivot or to shift or do things differently or say no, right? These kinds of things. I guess, does that bring up any bells or connect any dots when you think about your illustrious career, 20 plus years in the role of technology and how you saw that changing, how you just had to do what you did?
So one of my principles I call the process monkey. And so, it sounds like this is kind of very, I don't know what's right, very rigid, but actually it's not. So what you do as a leader, you have to identify the core processes in your company, in your business, in your line of work that are absolutely, essential, that you cannot take shortcuts on. And these are your fundamentals. But then you also have to understand you have to innovate along the way. And changing technology, especially in the espionage business, is a perfect example. So one of the things I talk about is, as an intelligence officer, my job is to spot, assess, develop, recruit, and handle what we call an agent. That's a spy. As we do that, we go out and we have to meet them on the street. So we do something called a surveillance detection route. And so I tell us, and that's, taking some turns, maybe putting on a disguise. I don't want anyone following me to identify who the spy is that I'm handling. So this is like a Navy SEAL, has to be able to shoot. A CIA officer has to know how to evade surveillance. And so there's ways to do this. And I tell a story about, when I was in the Middle East and I was stuck in traffic. I had to go meet a really important agent. It was like an 8-hour surveillance detection route. And I knew I missed my timing stop, so it wasn't going to happen. Now, nobody's with me. I'm alone. So this is all ethics and integrity on me. And what I had to do was I actually had to cancel. I aborted the meeting. I didn't go because I would not be able to do the fundamental things that would keep that agent alive. Okay, so that's a really interesting story about a process. But we also have changing technology in the espionage business, which means what? Which means people can track our cell phones. There's smart cities everywhere. Smart cities are really cool, sort of, but not for the intelligence officer who's like, there's facial recognition. There's cameras everywhere. And so as I'm trying to, to kind of disappear, there's people looking at me. So what do? We have to innovate. We have to always think ahead. So, and I love, there's so many different examples. A car is a built-in GPS unit, right? There's a GPS in there. I can't now drive my car to meet an agent. So what did we do sometimes to innovate? Hey, we got a bicycle. There's no engine on that. So I'm being serious. So you kind of go back to the basics. So you're always, technology changes, and just like everything else in life, but particularly for entrepreneurs, same thing for the intelligence business. We have to adapt and innovate as well. So the process monkey means you have those fundamentals, but you always got to be innovating as well.
One of the things we've talked about a few times on the show is, the role of kind of U.S. tech monopolies, and then it's pretty much, it's not a U.S. tech monopoly, it's now pretty much a Chinese tech monopoly. And, for example, in the U.S., we've seen, the 50 Cent army. China's kind of like, I think it's got to be over 1 million people that are, writing comments and creating posts. I'm sure Russia's also doing this too, because, obviously in the book you talk about, Russia was kind of your main post, right? You were in the Middle East and then you went to Russia. But we've seen the 50 Cent army influencing opinion. But we've also I've seen reports about, like the Chinese, I don't know what their secret service is even called, but maybe that's how it's like really secret. But like using LinkedIn to try and recruit agents.
Oh yeah.
And so even what you were just talking about, kind of changing the dynamic of saying, hey, how do you even source these people that could become a spy in the future? And it just seems like there's so much change technologically, and I just, I wouldn't even know where to start. I mean, it's not my world, your world, but it just seems like there's so much going on in developed countries and then emerging countries, and how you even make sense of that.
Yeah. So, I mean, and that's where, intelligence services have to always innovate. I wrote a piece, right before the new CIA director, Bill Burns, was confirmed, and it was an open letter to him. And actually, it turns out he read it and then he called me to talk about it. But there was, I had several different recommendations for him, but one of them was embracing technology, but also understanding that there's a new world out there. And so you gave a great example about LinkedIn and the dangers of LinkedIn. Everybody uses LinkedIn, but so do hostile intelligence services. So the more you put on there, the more someone who may be actually a Chinese intelligence officer is contacting you, looking like he or she is in a company in Hong Kong, asking you to do a market study, asking you to do some consulting, but it's the first step in kind of going down the road. And so, we always have to be, very aware of what our adversaries are doing. Of course, I can't talk about it. We do those things, as well. And I tell you one thing, there's, both from the United States perspective, but from foreign intelligence services, there's nothing better than Facebook. There's nothing better than social media, because I don't know if you do, and I certainly make the mistake. I mean, I'm all over Twitter, but we put way too much information on there. I mean, Facebook is going to tell someone your story, your life story. As what we do as a CI officer, my job, if I wanted to recruit you, we would do something called a targeting study. That means I want to know what you like, where you go at night, where you go during the day, all your friends, and I'm going to build a mechanism to approach you based on everything I know about you. Guess what you've done already? You've just handed that to me. Thank you. And so that's where we are in 2021. But we have to embrace it in terms of we have to utilize this, but we also have to understand that, from a defensive capability, we got to be really smart too.
So does that mean your kids aren't on TikTok?
My daughter's on TikTok. I've sat her down. I said, this is the Chinese intelligence services are reading your stuff. She goes, Dad, I'm 21. I don't care. And, and she still sends me TikTok videos.
Well, that's it right there. That's right. You can't let go of it. It's the monopolistic nature of it all. And we've seen now the US tech monopolies, Zuckerberg especially, kind of use it as a defense to say, hey, if you try and bust us up, you're actually going to be hurting US influence abroad.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we've seen, and we've talked about this on the show too, some US tech monopolies have a reticence to work with US government, US Department of Defense, which we have, very, very blatantly said that's completely inappropriate. I don't know if any of that resonates, like, because you're if it's US and Russia, and China, we've talked about like Southeast Asia and all these other markets, it's kind of like a battle between the US tech monopolies and the Chinese tech monopolies. And I do agree with Zuckerberg to some degree that these tech companies absolutely do help, project influence over these other territories, which I'm sure you saw, some of that stuff in the Middle East and in Russia and all these kinds of things.
It brings up a really interesting kind of case study on what happened in 2016. And so, ultimately the Russians really exploited our use of social media to influence the US elections. But if you take a look at some of the indictments from Robert Mueller, there was several Russians who were indicted. They had traveled to the United States and they had used Facebook and other forums in which to influence the American electorate. So, for example, and the Russians were really good at this. So Facebook would have their chat rooms or their forums in which they talk about really hot button issues, which really riled up the American public. So whether it's the Black Lives Matter movement or Second Amendment stuff, or it just goes on and on and on. And all of this was fake. So it was a fake Russian persona starting this, and of course, then kind of it feeds into this cycle in the United States. And that's really hard to battle. And so, I think that obviously, we're a free and democratic society. So there's a great struggle, in terms of how you regulate this or not. But I also think there's an awareness that, it is 2021 and, it's very hard to kind of regulate things like TikTok or Facebook ultimately. I will say, though, as an intelligence officer, so I think the FBI probably has a different view of Facebook than the CIA does. Again, we love this stuff for targeting. I want a terrorist in the Middle East to have a Facebook profile. That's awesome. Because then what he's going to do? His wife is going to have a profile too, meaning she's going to post pictures of her house in Yemen. Thank you. Yeah, I'm joking sort of when I say this, but we really can use this to our advantage too. So I think that probably the FBI for kind of internal issues here in the United States has a different view. But I love this stuff when I was in government service.
I will tell you that I guarantee the Chinese Secret Service, which I still don't know their name.
MSS. It's the Ministry of State Security, MSS.
Okay. They have a name. So that's kind of not as cool anymore. But so I guarantee they've got back doors, and I think it's been pretty well documented, into all these Chinese tech monopoly companies, platform companies, which is different. And I think probably very good that the U.S. tech monopolies don't just backdoor all the government agencies into these private businesses, but it is very different, and we've covered it on the show. A myriad of examples about the MSS and the tech monopolies. There really isn't much of a barrier in terms of that sharing of information. I guess how is that relevant to this conversation and to the book? I think is also mapping back to, some of what you've talked about more recently as it relates to if we broaden the scope of what we're talking about with technology, not just social media and not just, software companies, but what was also very unfortunate to read more about and learn more about, and what ultimately helped prompt or accelerate your retirement from the service. Could you tell us more about that? Because that's also right smack dab in this kind of technological bucket, just a different form of it.
Yeah, and I mean, this is certainly part of my journey. There was, I never thought that this is how, I actually never thought I'd be talking today to you or to any other, any podcasts or members of the media. I'm on TV a lot. So, I was someone who lived in the shadows for 26 years. So, my life journey has certainly taken a different stand. But ultimately, in December of 2017, I made a trip to Moscow. At the time, I was the head of clandestine operations over Europe and Eurasia. So it was a huge, vast territory. But I went there to see our embassy, to see there was an ambassador there, John Huntsman, who was kind of a legendary figure in foreign policy circles, and also to meet with Russian officials. The U.S. and Russia had a very tense and has a very tense relationship, but we still meet, in the intelligence services do. And what happened was, on the second or third night of the trip at a 5-star hotel, I woke to this, incredible case of vertigo. I had tinnitus ringing in my ears. I couldn't get up. I had a splitting headache. And, it turns out that both, I believe it. And so, my doctors do as well, that I was subject to, what likely was a directed energy weapon, very similar to what had happened to, 30 or 40 U.S. officials in Havana, Cuba in 2016. And unfortunately, that really derailed my career because, and to this day, I still have these headaches. And so I had to retire in July of 2019. At 50, I could retire, but certainly far short of what I had planned. And there's a certain an aura and a mystery around this. These directed energy attacks are still ongoing now. There's recent press reports that over 130 American officials have been subject to this. So this is a huge issue for the foreign policy community, for the intelligence community. It's affecting our military officers, our diplomats, and our intelligence officers overseas. And boy, when you talk about technology, I mean, at some point we're going to find out exactly what is happening. But this is one of those kind of unique mysteries. Eventually it'll be solved, but it's something that's, a lot of people are getting harmed right now. So it's pretty serious.
Yeah. It's very sad to hear. I was, also reading that it, happening abroad. It could also be happening in the United States.
Right. And so, there's been a couple of cases, alleged cases, involving National Security Council, personnel in Washington. So look, I've been out of government. I don't have access to the classified information. I do know, having talked to, a lot of people who know these individuals, that the symptoms are very similar to what myself and others have experienced. What I say about this, I put this whole issue into two bins. The first bin is access to healthcare, and one thing that this will be a story that will go down in history is just like Agent Orange in Vietnam, just like Gulf War syndrome after 1990. This is kind of gross government incompetence in taking care of our people, and so they didn't do that for our folks in Havana. They didn't do it for me until I kind of pitched a bit of a fit in public. Things are much better now, I must say. So that's the first bin. And the second bin is the technology pieces. What is this? What does this weapon look like? And, I think we're getting closer to finding out. We know that the Russians and others have had such directed energy weapons in the past. American companies have this. There's a company I know very well that is selling this system to the U.S. government to take down small drones. Directed energy, this is not a science fiction concept. It exists and it works. So that's the kind of the two bins that I look at: the healthcare piece, but also accountability and culpability, because this is something that's causing a lot of consternation, kind of in my old world. It's not only intelligence officers, diplomats; their family members. There's young kids who are getting injured by this, so it's pretty sad.
It's very sad, and great to hear that the health. I know the healthcare stuff has been a contentious point. You wouldn't think it would be, but glad to hear there's,
right.
More progress being made on that front and taking care of, people that have served the country. So that's great to hear. I was reading this and digging into your book and just reading more about your career. And I feel like you were saying, hey, dating back to like 2014 or maybe earlier, but I know at least the date 2014, you were saying, hey, the Russians are kind of taking off the gloves. They're becoming a lot more aggressive.
Right.
And it seemed like kind of like a gentleman's agreement between, the different secret service agencies was that, um, there's no killing, right?
Right.
You're doing spying operations, but if you're going to actually end someone's life, that's kind of like a whole special other situation. Like that really doesn't happen. I felt like that was kind of news to me. You watch James Bond and you watch Jack Ryan, but that's not actually what's happening, right? It's not licensed to kill. That's not the standard operating procedure.
No, you're 100% right. And so there was this gentleman's agreement over the years, particularly with, when Russia was the Soviet Union. And so intelligence officers are doing harm to each other really was off limits. Now, of course, our terrorist adversaries would certainly try to kill CIA officers all the time, but we're talking about kind of state actors where it's us and the Russians or us and the Chinese. But I think something's changed. I attribute, frankly, all of it to Russian President Vladimir Putin, because ultimately this is an individual, on the world stage has violated so many of these norms. And so whether, he's interfering in elections all over Europe and the United States, trying to kill, his own dissidents, trying to kill using a chemical weapon, a former Russian intel officer who had resettled in England several years ago, Sergei Skripal. And of course the Russian activities in Syria, the Russian Air Force committing, atrocious war crimes, killing civilians in Syria. And so I think the Russians have certainly taken the gloves off. And so the United States has to really take a different view of this, because whatever we've been doing to try to thwart this and stop this really hasn't worked, and kind of getting a little into your world and your listeners' world as well is all about kind of the cyber attacks and ransomware. And it's really interesting because if you think about our competition with the Soviet Union, or worry about this is all over nuclear annihilation. Well, we've actually moved now into the cyberspace where the Russians, and I don't care if you talk about the Russian intelligence services or a Russian hacker, living in Russia, who is under the protection ultimately of the Russian government, but they have an ability to take down critical infrastructure targets in the United States. So whether it's Colonial Pipeline or the meat pack, the U.S.'s largest meat packer, all of a sudden. These operations, which are incredibly cheap to run, can be amazingly damaging to the United States. So this new competition, it's not in the nuclear sphere anymore. It's in cyberspace, and this is something that I think that the U.S. is really struggling to try to figure out how to deter this.
What we say is, look, we may not be in a kinetic war, but we are today in information warfare. Like, right. No question about it. We are currently we are in a war. It's an information war.
No, it is for sure. It's also, a battle for hearts and minds as well. I mean, I think about, and I talk a lot about this, and I have over the last several days, after the summit in Geneva between President Biden and President Putin. So how do we deter the Russians? And one of the things that I like, and it was frankly started under President Trump, and it's continued under President Biden, is this concept of defend forward. And that has to do with what NSA and Cybercom are doing. And so it's been reported that, one of the ways we are kind of hitting back on Russia is kind of an aggressive cyber campaign, offensive cyber campaign. And I think that when, I think President Biden gave a list of 16 infrastructure targets during the summit, that he gave it to Putin and saying, these are off limits for hackers or for any kind of cyber warfare. And so, okay, so got it. But what happens when they do it? What are we going to do in response? And so I think, this is something in terms of international relations that a lot of really kind of smart people, deep thinkers, are really struggling about. We had in the age of nuclear annihilation, the idea of mutually assured destruction. Are we going to use that concept in terms of cyber now, in terms of going after each other's infrastructure targets? So it's a new age. It's 2021, and I'll tell you one thing: if I was someone in college right now, I would get a degree, do something in terms of cyber. That is the future. There's no doubt about it.
You got to do it, right? Going back to the leadership thing, right? I mean, if they're taking their gloves off, then we better take our gloves off and put on some brass knuckles.
Yeah.
Right. Otherwise, if we just keep doing what we're doing, and then why would you expect any different result? You know, right. What I mean?
Yeah. And so, one of my leadership principles I talk about in the book, I call it adversity is the PED to success, the performance enhancing drug to success. And ultimately, I just talk about, you have to hit rock bottom first. You have to fail first in order to succeed. Like that's your super fuel on how you grow. So this can be in the business world, it can be in the sports world, it can be in the intelligence world, but it's also, okay, we've been hit here with all these cyber attacks. So we've learned for this. We got our taste of adversity. I mean, 3 weeks ago, you couldn't get gas anywhere on the East Coast. It was insane. I live in Northern Virginia. I live in Vienna, Virginia. We had no gas. I had to go pick up my kid from college. I couldn't go. And so if we don't learn from that kind of adversity, we're kind of fooling ourselves. And there's so many examples in the, in my kind of my world, in the sports world. But hey, the easiest thing I talk about all the time is Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team, right? So, he clearly did okay, but he didn't quit. And he learned from that kind of adversity.
Yeah. And, I think that note of optimism, also something that I reflect a lot about on the show, is that people are waking up, right? People are kind of recognizing what's going on, whether it's, big tech overstepping a lot of boundaries, and that needing to be reined in, or whether it's, I think kind of popping the bubble on like being buddy with communist dictatorship countries, right? It's like, yeah, don't really know if you can trust them, not really working out so well past, certainly past few years. And
Right.
I think we kind of hoped that things would turn out differently. Doesn't really seem like it is. And I think people are waking up to that. And, what I see here in the book and what we're talking about here is, it's Russia right? It's like Russia and China, right? These attacks that you're talking about, these microwave attacks, like it's in Russia and it's happening in China. And I feel like you're seeing both of them kind of tag team this and are kind of becoming more and more buddy, which is a pretty, dreary outlook.
So, we have a word for this now. So, of course, we spent 20 years fighting kind of the counterterrorism wars. And one can debate whether that was, it was necessary to do this for so long or not. But clearly after 9/11, we had to respond. But there's a new buzzword now in the kind of the national security circles, and we call it near peer competition. And that means China, Russia. And so we are not fighting, this kind of, guerrilla armies or terrorist armies in South Asia, in Afghanistan, for example. But and so now we're kind of going back to kind of competitors who are pretty good, and so we have to up our game on that as well. But and the near peer competition of 2021 and beyond is going to look radically different than what we faced if we're in Yemen or Syria or Iraq or Afghanistan. And so we do have to adapt and innovate. And look, there you see so much in the media now about. And there's significant worry about Chinese technical capabilities in the military sphere. And if you take a look at kind of recent conflicts, the use of drones, and this is not the drones that we have, because the United States has done pretty damn well using drones in our counterterrorism fight. But these are drones that the Azerbaijan military bought from the Israelis, that they use really successfully in a conflict with Armenia recently. And maybe not a lot of people know what I'm talking about here, but this is really interesting and significant because the Azerbaijanis took out the entire Armenian kind of tank battalions in a day using drones. And so, everyone kind of sits back and says, whoa, and what does the US military now look like? Are we able to defend against that? So, technology and innovation is moving so quickly, and it's something it's critical. I was lucky to work in the CIA where, and when you have these kind of classified special access programs, we were able to kind of, build certain things and employ them on a very quick basis. But generally, the U.S. is not, the U.S. military in particular is not very good on timelines. To employ something might take 5 years where you really need 5 minutes. And so these are the things that everyone's thinking about now, kind of in the national security sphere, when it comes to how do we embrace technology in this near peer environment.
I love that. Yeah, near peer. And it's spot on. And I'll give you a little quote from my book. It's been it's another James Bond reference in the film Skyfall. When Bond first meets Q, Bond's technology guru, Q jokes that he could do more damage on my laptop sitting in my pajamas before my first cup of Earl Grey than you can do in a year in the field. Oh, so why do you need me? Bond asks. Every now and then a trigger has to be pulled, Q says, or not pulled. It's hard to know which in your pajamas.
Love it.
Yeah, I mean, he doesn't have, I guess, the 2021 version is Bond actually doesn't have a license to kill. But anyway, outside of that little detail, but I think it is exactly to this point, right? Like that when you're going after these near peer rivals, Russia and China, and the role of technology and then the people in the field, right? I mean, all of that is changing and needs to kind of be in a constant change, right? If it's not constantly changing, then you're falling behind.
No, that's 100% true. And so, we better be really careful and not, believing our own hype, because we might be really good right now, but our near peer competitors are working, maybe twice as hard. And I talk about that in the book. One of the principles I talk about is humility is best served warm. But, because really great leaders know, you own your mistakes, you learn from them, and you innovate, and you don't scapegoat or deflect. And you definitely don't believe your own hype. I tell a story in the book, and and so I was involved in and I have to be careful on how I say this here, but it was an operational unit that was tracking terrorists, and sometimes they would meet their demise, but sometimes we made mistakes. And in one case, there was what we call civcas, civilian casualties, and we had injured a civilian. That's really bad. And for all the things you hear about the U.S. government and civilian casualties, this is something that we take incredible precautions not to have happen. So what did I do? So I had to go up and talk to the leadership of CIA. It was 40 people in a conference room, not really the place I really wanted to be at that point. But I walked up there and I said, okay, this is what happened. These are the 4 things we've done to correct this. And by the way, this is all on me. It's my responsibility, because they were asking me who was responsible. So it's on me. We've already made adjustments. And I said, any questions? And there was silence. And I walked out and I saw a senior officer and I said, man, I'm screwed. I'm going to get fired here. He's like, no, actually, you're not. Because you did exactly what you're supposed to do. You owned the problem, you fixed the problem, and you took responsibility and you moved on. So my bosses were happy. Then I get that back down to my unit. And they tell me, hey, Mark, what happened? I said, I got your back. But by the way, I knew someone who made the mistake. but I said, and they, so it was. It built incredible team loyalty that I also stood up for them. So when I say humility is best served warm, boy, we better embrace that concept in such a near peer environment where you have to kind of innovate and change all the time. And I love the kind of the expression, don't believe your own hype, because boy, in my world of intelligence operations, I did some great things, and I also got my face kicked in a lot. And it's the old baseball adage of if you're batting 300, you're an all-star. That means you fail 7 out of 10 times. And so that humility concept is something that I really learned over time, but is really important when you talk leadership.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's so true, right? Hey, you make a mistake, own it.
Yep.
What's the solution, right? Don't pass blame, don't deflect it. Just own it and let's move on. How do we fix it and keep moving, right? Couldn't agree more. Last thoughts here, Mark. I mean, maybe anything on the book kind of that you want to highlight that we didn't cover? Anything that you think the American public doesn't understand or should understand, about what the CIA does that maybe they don't understand? Parting thoughts? No,
that's a wonderful question and a great way to kind of conclude this, because I wrote the book also because I wanted to explain to the American people and really to the world, what a indispensable institution the CIA is, for national security. And it's made up of, men and women who really do work in the shadows. Our successes, are never celebrated, and our failures are kind of trumpeted all over the planet. But these are really dedicated men and women who kind of stand on the ramparts, protecting the U.S. So I wanted to kind of tell their story. And these are normal people. I live in Northern Virginia, so actually there's a lot of my neighbors work there too. So it's a pretty funny area to live in. But they go to Giant, they go to Safeway, they go to Walgreens. They go to the fruit stand. They're normal, men and women. But in my view, they're heroes because they also, go overseas for great parts of their career and put their lives on the line. So, Americans can sleep safely at night. So I wanted to tell that story and put that out there. And you don't hear a lot about that these days. But it was, I always believed that the CIA had a soul. It's an incredible place made up of really amazing individuals. And so I wanted to talk about it and celebrate it. And that's you'll get a lot out of that in the book too.
The book is here. Clarity in Crisis, Leadership Lessons from the CIA. That's Marc Polymeropoulos.
There you go.
Got it, I think, a second time. Marc, so great to have you with us. Thank you so much. Wish you all the best with the book. Great read. And thanks again for coming on.
Thanks so much.